right. Good morning and welcome to the Aired Out podcast, live from the basement once again. Temporary situation. We've talked to Jen some more and we're working on details with getting the studio up and running. And I think that that's going to be possible maybe sooner than later with some tweaks. So that looks hopeful. Good news there. And get back in our own space where we're not listening to the barking dogs when something ruffles in the leaves outside. So, yes, welcome. And as you know, Wednesday we are typically joined by Thom Lauzon, and that's no different today. So,
must be typical.
yes. Good morning.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing okay.
Good.
Doing okay. Keeping up with things, hitting our marks. Feel
Been
good.
super busy.
Been super busy, but that's what you sign on for.
Mm-hmm.
So we're okay, and we're okay because we're supported by so many people, by the contractors who are working with us, by the city. It makes it easier, and the message I keep giving is we are all in this together. Some can do a little more than others, but everybody is going to do their part, and I'm convinced that that's going to happen here in Barre. Great segue into the Barre Community Relief Fund.
Yes, which is up and running.
Which is the grant portal went live, so we have got some great volunteers who are going to review the grant applications, but the good news is the grant portal went live, so businesses and individuals who need assistance. And, let me say before we get too far into the weeds that, this is a somewhat modest fund. When I say modest, we're proud of the fact that we have raised $250,000. We've sort of challenged the community to raise another $50,000 by August 31st. And if folks can dig a little deeper and help out a little more and chip in a little bit, and we are able to raise $50,000 by August 31st, Karen and I will match that with a donation of $50,000.
Which is
and it's
absolutely incredible.
No, what's incredible, we can do that, Raylene. I mean, in some respects, our future is not unclear.
Mm-hmm.
How this all works out for me and my companies, and for Barre, that's unclear. But we all know that we have a future, all of us,
Right.
and we're all in this together. We all have a future. Our goal is simply to make sure that no one gets left behind. So it's not about the size of the donation. It's not about, big
Right.
deal, we can do a donation like this.
Right.
It's some of the folks who are going to donate $10, that $10 might be harder than our check. And so every little bit helps, and we are in this together. So like I said, we were thrilled to provide that matching donation up to $50,000. But more importantly, I'm thrilled that the grant portal is finally open. Like I said, our goal is to raise $1 million. We've got a ways to go, and we know that given the size of our grant, the limits of our grant applications for individuals and businesses, we know we're not going to make them whole. But we just want them to know that we hear them. We see them. We wish we could do more, and we're going to keep working hard and trying to raise as much money as we can to meet the need.
And it's going to take a lot of people. This is literally going to take.
It's
all
taken
of
a lot
us.
of people to get this far. I mean, we had, you've done a great job. So many people have contributed what they can. Some people could volunteer 5 hours. Some people volunteered 60 hours a week. Well, it took all of that. Like I said, it's not how much you can do. It's that you're chipping in and doing what you can, and that's how we get to the other side. So. It's taken so many people, and I'm proud of where we are. I mean, the city looks good.
I think so,
considering it's been a month. But this is when you get to the expensive stuff. The next 30 days are really critical, because the next 30 days, and I get it, whether you're an individual or a business, the next 30 days can be pretty damn discouraging.
Mm-hmm.
Cleaning up was one thing, getting everything clean, getting everything stripped, getting everything pulled apart. That's one thing. But when you got to put it all back together, when a furnace costs $12,000, a panel costs $8,000, now we're going to get into the expensive work.
Right.
And we're going to get into the work, given where we are. We're almost to Labor Day. We're going to have inclement weather, cold weather in
Tomorrow,
about 30
pretty
days.
much is what it feels like.
Doesn't it feel differently when, and it started, it was either Monday or yesterday when I got up, and I leave the house kind of early, but it felt more like fall.
Uh-huh.
When I left the house, it's weird. It's got that feel to it, the feeling of the air on your skin and the smell of it.
It is different.
It's like, it kind of feels a little like fall. And so it's important that we get, obviously we've got to restore heat. I have buildings where the heat has not yet been restored. We're working on that. We'll likely have it done in the next couple of weeks, and I'm proud. I'm proud of how far we've come and how hard everyone has worked. What I worry about is maybe the people who don't have those resources. They've never, we've built, we've done a lot of projects. Mm-hmm. I know exactly how to put a building back together, and I know. And sometimes people may look at how I'm doing it and they may say, well, that's weird that this step went first. There's a process. And when you've done it enough, you understand the process. What I worry about most is the people who may have gotten things cleaned up. Mm-hmm. They're getting them dried out.
Or people that haven't. I learned of some people on Monday who they went to the shelter, then they went to a hotel, and they weren't sure that they were going to stick it out. Mm-hmm. So they had just walked away and had not done anything yet.
Yeah.
And Sunday night decided they were going to go home and give it a shot. And so literally they're just now, the basement has been pumped, but they're just now cleaning everything out.
Right. And you're going to have, and those are the folks that we have to pay special attention to. Mm-hmm. The folks who maybe have everything cleaned out, have it dried, have the power back on at their home, because even if, there's a process, even if your panel was underwater, an electrician can get it up and going in pretty short order. You've got to strip the breakers, you got to replace them, isolate any affected circuits. It's not really that difficult. Mm-hmm. But then when you get into repiping, moving appliances possibly from the basement to the first floor, that's when it can get very expensive and it can get very time consuming. And it's important that you make advancement on those steps. If you call an HVAC contractor on September 15th and say, I need a boiler in here, you may have an extended installation time.
Right.
And you don't have a couple of months at that point. So, those are the questions I really want answers to. Mm-hmm. Good segue into our meeting yesterday.
Yes.
So Senator Kesha Ram. Kesha has been a personal friend of Karen and mine for years. So her Senate committee came to Barre. The mayor took them on a tour. There were a bunch of us there, and the mayor led a tour, and we went through, started at 4th Street, went to 3rd, went to 2nd, went to 1st, not too far up the street, just so they could sort of get an idea of the extent of the damage. Mm-hmm. And so then in the afternoon, they took testimony. It was a very long day. I really appreciate their time because I finally left room 9. So the tour started at 9:30. They were obviously taking testimony all day. I left room 9 at 5 o'clock to make the council meeting at 5:30.
Wow.
And they were still going.
Yeah.
And she texted me later on in the evening, and and she's got a 4-month-old. She's got a new baby. New baby. Why does everyone always say new baby? Is such thing as an old baby?
Yeah.
But so Mira was at home waiting for mom, and she texted me later on, just said, I was really impressed not only by the tour, but by everyone's testimony and how you feel about the future. Mm-hmm. So, when you look at the North End, I think we have, and I'll get the numbers approximate, 350 homes that were affected by the flood, affected to varying degrees. Of those 350, and I think the actual number is 363, we have possibly up to 50, and that's a bit of a moving target, that could be condemned, that will not be inhabitable and will likely, the damage won't be remediated. Some of those are affected by mudslides, landslides. Some of those are affected by flooding. So we're trying to zero in on those numbers. But that leaves 313 homes that I want to know a lot more about.
Right, need help.
Well, we know they need help, but we don't know how much they need help. I don't even know, we need to know, well, where are they located? How at risk are they? And the question we need to ask ourselves with those 313 homes, and obviously the homeowner or the homeowner, or if it's a landlord, the building owner, and the residents, everybody has a place in that discussion. We need to make sure, talk to them about how they feel about reinvesting in a property that in all likelihood could flood again in the next 10 years. And that's why this time the discussion really needs to be different. We need to laser focus on mitigation. What we can do to prevent this from happening again, to prevent hundreds of people from being, displaced. And those are really important questions to have. And, put it in this context. If the average remediation cost, so 313 homes, the average remediation cost is $50,000. Let's use that number. You can use a higher number. You can use a lower number. And imagine that some of those homes, or the majority of those homes, are at risk, and they may flood again, and they likely will flood again in the next 10 years. In a 30-year period, we're going to invest 150 unadjusted for inflation. We're going to invest 150,000 into doing it again in 10 years, having all this fun one more time. If the cumulative effect there is $47 million over a 30-year period.
Wow.
If you add in personal property, and let's use a 50% factor, say that folks lost $25,000 worth of personal property, refrigerators, stoves, personal possessions, cars. If you use that factor, then the number jumps up by another, $23 million, and now you're up to $70 million. So that's what we really have to think about, and that was that was the focus of my testimony. Is we've got to do this smarter. Everyone has a place in the discussion, but I think what we should be doing next, the North End is far and away the most affected area in terms of housing. It is far and away the most affected area in Barre, and it's not the first time it's been affected. And I think the next thing we need to do is engage those residents, those homeowners in the North End, and let's have a real conversation about how we avoid this the next time. So obviously part of that conversation is going to be how many of you would be interested in a buyout?
Right.
How many of you would be interested in moving, sort of out of harm's way? That's a discussion that we had back in.
And then do we have a place for them to go out of harm's
Well, that's
way?
going to be, that's our next challenge. But I think if you do it strategically, when I testified at the committee yesterday, I talked a little bit about modular building. There's a company up in Canada. I actually hope to road trip it up there next week. They're called RCM Group with an E.com. And they have done some incredible projects, 170 modules. And they have done some incredible projects in Quincy, Massachusetts, and Cambridge, Massachusetts. These are not dumpy, ugly. Sometimes when people think of prefab, they think of double wides and single wides, and it ends there. Prefab construction is nothing new.
Right.
I mean, they've been doing it for years, and they've been doing.
Bectos does it.
We're just sort of stuck with the whole, stick build. And stick build, prefab has its advantages. It has its disadvantages. The biggest disadvantage, because I actually spoke with the architect of the Quincy project late last week, the biggest disadvantage with prefab, and I could relate to this, is that you have to make all your decisions up front. Every decision has to be made. When you stick build a building, when you go from the ground up and you're stick building the material, materials come in traditionally.
As you go. Yeah.
You've got to have a huge yard, because you got to have place to store all the materials, and it's a bit of a process. With prefab, you have to make all those decisions up front. You can't, when you're stick building a building, there are constantly change orders. You know, you thought this door would be great there, but then when you started building it, it's like, that doesn't really work there. And you call the architect, and the architect says, yeah, I see what you mean. Let's redesign it. They redesign it. You submit a change order, and the contractor changes it. And I mean, you do it with you do it all the time. Well, when you do prefab, obviously those decisions have to be made up front. It's got to be right the first time. If you have a module that gets damaged during transport, that can present a problem, because depending on how damaged it is, it can, you know, grind the whole job to a halt while the company prefabs, you know, builds that module again or corrects whatever damage happened during shipping. So got its advantages, it's got its disadvantages, but the huge advantage that I see is that they construct the modules very quickly. They're in a factory-controlled environment. If it absolutely pours, they're still working. They can work at night. You know, they don't need daylight. They're in a factory. So you've got a very controlled setting. You eliminate waste. It's a much greener way to build. And probably the huge advantage is that while you're building the building in the factory, you can be doing the site work.
Right.
Whereas, you know, traditionally you do the site work first, you pour the concrete, you bring all your materials in, you start framing. You know, literally, like I said, that project in Quincy, Mass, 170 modules, 14-week production time. So I got thinking about, you know, when you think about innovation, you think about efficiency, you think about, I'm a great student of history. Right now, and I've been asking everybody this question, in 1927, the state of Vermont flooded in November. That flood was much, much, much worse than this flood was. We displaced thousands of Vermonters. In November, we didn't have FEMA.
Right.
We didn't have a lot of the safety net programs we had. What did they do in 1927? And I'm not asking that at all in jest. We have a lot of people who are displaced. We're trying to figure out where to put them. I'd like to know, I really can't find any great historic account of what we did in 1927. Did people go stay with friends? Did families double up all the time? You know, suddenly, you know, they just took a family in.
Put people in the barn? Yeah.
I don't know. But I'd really be interested in knowing what they did in 1927, because that could perhaps provide a little bit of a roadmap, you know, for our recovery. So I'm a big student of history. I read about history a lot, and I look at moments that really changed America. And I think that when you look at modular construction, modular apartment construction, you know, think about this, Raylene. One of the senators was commenting that we don't have enough tradespeople. So if we wanted to build 200 or 300 units of housing, and we wanted to do it quickly, we don't have enough tradespeople to do that. And even if we could bring tradespeople to Vermont, where are they going to stay?
Right.
We don't have housing for them either.
We were just in that situation with the volunteers that were here. Where do we put them all?
Exactly. And thankfully,
the churches,
the schools stepped up, different, you know, they stayed in gymnasiums. I don't know that contractors would necessarily do that.
No.
If you said to a contractor, your crew, I guess if the price is right, probably they would.
Right. Here's some
but again, now school is back in session.
Right.
So I guess the gymnasium and the schools, well, those are kind of out now.
Yeah.
Because children are going to be using them. So my comment to the senator was, well, if you can't bring the contractors to the project, why don't we bring the project to the contractors? There are, there are prefabricators, there are factories all over the Northeast. So I said, it occurred to me that if you really wanted to do, if you wanted to build a lot of units of housing, quality units, and you wanted to do it quickly, you wouldn't have to buy out an entire neighborhood. You could strategically buy properties. That would be your site. That would be the footprint of the building. That would only require 3, 4, 5, 6 properties. And as you're doing the site work, you're actually working with 3 manufacturers. So instead of building a building one at a time, you literally have 3 manufacturers prefabricating 3 buildings at the same time. It just speeds up the process. So, talking more about history, if we think about efficiency, innovation, Henry Ford revolutionized transportation, when he started mass producing the Model T. And it was through innovation and controlled production that he was able to affect that change, bring the cost down, and produce a quality product. Now, in some respects, people might say, oh, so it's going to be very cookie cutter. All of the units are going to be the same. Yes, they are.
Yes.
Yes. If it's an apartment building, sure. If you may have different colors, you may have different flooring, you may have different options. But if you go to any large cities that are accommodating growth and accommodating
a lot
population,
of the neighborhoods here already are that way.
Exactly.
Back
and
in the 60s
what's
and 70s,
wrong with that?
Right. We had a few contractors. They built them all the same.
And that's exactly what happened when in the Second World War, when all of the GIs came back from war in the 50s, and there was this huge housing boom in the United States, and we revolutionized, in some respects, the housing industry because they did it very differently. They started doing it by making every home the same. Now, over the years, those homes have changed. They've been remodeled. But as you pointed out, there are neighborhoods here in Barre where literally the home started out exactly the same, but it's an efficient way to do it. And I think I think what the key to our recovery is going to be engagement, mitigation, and efficiency. We have to be efficient. We have to figure out a way, to build many units of housing at the same time. And I think if you look at prefab, personally, I think that's the way to go. I think it's going to revolutionize construction.
Somebody is asking, what about Oswald Street in Barre? Have you toured that location?
Certainly, I have. It certainly affected. There are two types. The FEMA buyout program, we all know that that's a process. I have been advocating for Barre at every level of government, spoken directly with Senator Welch, Senator Welch, Representative Ballant is coming to town next week, and I'm really looking forward to having a meaningful conversation with her. I mean, speak to the governor, and we communicate on some level probably about every day. And the FEMA process, I don't know that that's going to be impactful enough. What I'm really hoping for is I'm hoping that we see on the federal level, we see a significant budget adjustment, supplemental budget adjustment act, one that benefits Vermont. The president did communicate with Congress, did present Congress with a bill last week. I think the president was asking for $12 billion for FEMA. There had been talk earlier about possibly Vermont would have been part of that supplemental budget adjustment act. We were not. There was nothing in there for Vermont. At first, I was a little discouraged, and I said, it's kind of, a little disappointed that maybe the president forgot about us. But then as I really thought it through and do my best thinking when I mow the lawn or when I'm running the sweeper,
right?
The parking lot
right.
sweeper, because you're just going back and forth and you're thinking, but not really having to think too hard. You're just making straight lines. And when I really thought about it, if you think about what's happened in the United States, Vermont, then Kentucky, now Hawaii. And when you think about what's happening, when I thought it through, I said, not that I would ever second guess the president, but I thought, okay, well, maybe the president is simply waiting because we have some natural disasters kind of happening simultaneously. And rather than present this to Congress in a piecemeal fashion, maybe the president is simply waiting so that he can.
We hope.
I hope. Look, we're going to need some help in Vermont. We have the state resources to recover and rebuild. We don't have the state resources to recover, rebuild as we should, and mitigate. We simply don't. If you think about kind of where we are and what the effect is going to be on the state, thank God for ARPA funds. We're going to have a lot of uninsured casualty losses.
Right.
For every $1 million of uninsured casualty loss, that is a tax deduction. So for every $1 million in uninsured damage, the state of Vermont loses, using a midpoint, state income tax, using a midpoint, the state loses $65,000 in revenue. Think about sales taxes.
Yeah.
There are restaurants and businesses in Barre that are still closed. There are many, many restaurants and businesses in Montpelier who are still closed, and they will be
20% are not going to open.
And think about, even at the local level, we have a local options tax in Barre that's going to affect that. They have a local options tax in Montpelier, parking revenue. We haven't gotten to abatements and reductions in assessments. I mean, if you have a building that is totally offline, this was a natural disaster. So in Barre, if a landlord has a building that is unoccupiable,
right,
and the building simply can't be occupied, then I would suspect that owner is going to ask the city for some sort of abatement or adjustment. I could see in Barre and Montpelier, as I testified yesterday, I see an absolutely clear path to a 7-figure deficit in Barre and Montpelier general fund deficit, meaning over $1 million.
Yeah.
I'll be kind of surprised if it's not over $1 million. I mean, the city of Barre and the city of Montpelier, we both have uncovered costs that we're going to have. We're going to be cleaning out storm drains for the next 2 years.
Right.
Our public works crew has done an absolutely incredible job.
They have been
but there's
hard.
still a lot of dirt out there.
Yeah.
That dirt goes somewhere. And, even waistlines. We had to have a building jetted last week because the water was so deep, it got over the toilet. A lot of that silty water got into the toilet. And, and eventually it plugged the waistlines. We had to have the entire building jetted at a cost of $3,600. And I'm grateful that it happened now.
Right.
So I actually went back to all of my affected buildings and said, we need to check the domestic waste lines so that, I don't want to be doing this in 10-degree weather.
Right.
So there are going to be a lot. We've got a long way to go. But I'm absolutely convinced that if we keep the discussions thoughtful, keep the politics and personalities out of it, and just focus on what's right for our neighbors, what's right for our neighborhoods, for our cities, I think we'll be okay.
Do you see like a forum, kind of like you all did for All In for Barre, where people go to the odd and it's an actual discussion?
I think we need to listen. And it's really hard. You'd love to go to every home and engage people one-on-one, but we simply don't have the time for that.
Right.
Because part of my concerns are, in government, you've heard me say this many times, we'll always have more problems than we have resources. Our base problems with housing, with opioid addiction, with the cost of health care, those problems haven't gone away. It's just that right now flood recovery is the priority. But it doesn't mean any of those problems are gone away. So our resources, I'm hopeful that we will receive additional assistance from the federal government. But in terms of state resources, they're still where they are. It is what it is.
Right.
So it's just really, so we have to be as efficient as possible with our recovery resources. So imagine there's a homeowner, and this is what some folks are facing today. Imagine there's a homeowner on the North End or anywhere in Barre on Oswald Street. And that homeowner says, I have to question, I have my $21,000 in FEMA money, and holy cow, the clock's ticking. I can get a new furnace installed, but should I really be reinvesting that $21,000 back into this house just so it can flood again? I don't know if I should.
That's a wise
time
pause.
Time is a luxury we don't have, unfortunately. We have to make decisions quickly. We have to make them thoughtfully, but we don't have time to to linger on these things because. So let's say that person puts that $21,000 back into that home. And then 6 months from now, we're approaching them and saying, well, would you be interested in a buyout?
Right.
Yes, I absolutely would because my home is at risk. Okay, here's your buyout price. Well, what about the $21,000 that I put into the house from FEMA? Well, that's your problem.
Right.
So
Right.
we're up against it a little bit.
Yeah.
We're up against it a little bit. And, listen, some people know how to make things happen, and some people get mired in the weeds.
Right.
And the people who get mired in the weeds, are going to crash and burn. We have a lot of decisions to make. We don't have a lot of time to make them. But it, having said that, it's important that we listen, but it's also equally important that people engage. It's so important.
Well, and it's super important that we have people like you who are you do know what you're doing and your boots on the ground and you're able to communicate this stuff for people that don't necessarily understand all of this. It's a lot.
I can't even imagine. I spent a lot of time in the North End. We had a pretty heavily affected building there that we're sheetrocking, by the way. And so I'd go down, I'd meet with contractors, have some conversations, and then I'd walk around the neighborhood and I got to know some people. One conversation made me really feel good yesterday. As we were doing the tour in the morning, there was a young lady from the family center, and I recognized her, and I went over, how you doing? She said, well, I'm visiting a tenant in this building. She lives on the second floor. She lives with her partner and her newborn, and so I'm just visiting them. And then the young lady happened to come down, and I introduced myself, and I said, are you getting what you need? Do you have? She said, well, we don't have hot water yet. She said, the landlord's working on it. And I said, okay, but do you have, you have water, you have a refrigerator, you have your basic needs are met. You don't have hot water, you're taking cold showers, that's no fun. And she kind of laughed and she said, yeah, well, I boiled the water for the baby. The baby's the only one that gets a hot bath. And I thought that was kind of cute. And I said, but how has your landlord been? I said, I said, I'm not the landlord police here.
Right.
But I just have to ask, how has your landlord been responding? And she said, fantastic. She said, my landlord has been right on top of things. They call me every day. They communicate with me. I called her when, I had a breaker that went off. I don't have access to the basement. I had a breaker that went off at 11 p.m. She said it was probably my fault. I think I might have overloaded the circuit. And she said my landlord came right down at 11 o'clock at night and reset the breaker for me. So I was really happy to hear that. And I think that's how most landlords are responding. I think they genuinely care. But the things that always concern me is that meeting with, I know HVAC, I know plumbing, I know the jet lines. There's all these things that 30 years of experience have just skills that I have. Right. And these are the things that I've learned. I worry most about people who don't know where to turn. So, and sometimes when people don't know where to turn, they can get paralyzed. They just don't move forward at all.
Right.
Because,
Until
okay,
it's
hey,
too
today it's, it was 55 degrees last night. I had the window open.
Yeah.
I slept with the window
Me too.
open. It was kind of nice. I like it on the cool side anyway. Yeah. So they may think, okay, really, I'm okay. I'm getting what I need. I'm okay. But all of a sudden, overnight, the temperatures drop to 35, and that's what I'm concerned about. So the only part, this is not a criticism, because I am so proud of Nicholas and everyone at the city and how they've stepped up. And this is really the role of the council, the city council. We need to start engaging. We really need to start having these town meetings, and we need to start engaging people, and we need to start talking to them about, do they need anything today? Where are they at? Is their furnace ordered? If it isn't ordered, why not? Some people can't order their furnace until they get their FEMA money.
Right.
Because rightfully so, we've got a team of contractors out there working their asses off. And I don't blame a plumbing contractor who charges a fair price, and I've not seen any local price gouging. I've seen some out-of-state companies come in, and they kind of suck, and I'm getting a little sick of them. Local companies, our tradespeople have been working incredibly hard. They're charging fair prices. But when that plumber has to order a $5,000 furnace, I absolutely understand when he has to look at the customer and say, look, I'm working hard here, and if you don't pay me, it could put me out of business, so I need to have you at least pay for the materials. You can pay me the rest after I do the job, but I got to at least have the cost of the materials up front so I can get them ordered. I understand that, and I don't disagree with anyone who does that. But maybe the homeowner doesn't have $5,000 or $6,000.
Find it.
A lot of most people don't. So what are they doing? They have to wait for their FEMA money, and then they can get the furnace ordered. By then, it could be September 15th or the end of September, and then they're going to be up against it. It's going to be a little too late. So that's why I think the next step is to start engaging people and talking to them about, what does the future look like? What does mitigation look like? What does the North End look like, post-flood? We got to do a better job. This is my third rodeo. And in 2000, there was about, I think, $1.2 million in mitigation in 2015, there was about, or 2016, there was about $1.2 million worth of mitigation money available. City of Barre, countywide, Washington countywide, City of Barre got $750,000 of that money. We effected some buyouts on Brook Street, and we installed the trash racks on Brook Street, and they performed as intended. So in retrospect, we did what we could given the resources that we had, but we all know it's not enough. And they know at the state level, you're not going to see $1.2 million available for mitigation. You're going to see, I hope, much, much, much more. Because as we have these discussions, even all of the discussions yesterday, everyone was talking about what do we look like going forward. Right. It's got to look different. We can't just rebuild houses, give someone $21,000, have them put their house back together.
Right, make it look pretty.
It won't even look pretty for $21,000. $21,000 doesn't get you very far when you start looking at home repairs. The cost of housing has gone up 35% in 2 years. I mean, so is the cost of construction. Things are, so, that $21,000 is what $14,000 would have purchased just 2 years ago. So
I just read an article that said construction costs in Vermont have gone up 78% since
it's
2018.
huge. So we've got to have those conversations. We've got to be, I don't think people want to be doing this every 10 years. I know I don't.
For sure not.
So we've got to be, as we rebuild, it's really important to me that we start engaging people. So that's likely going to be my next step. I think I'll probably reach out to the manager and the clerk and the council and say, we need to start engaging people. And we need to have the meeting like they had in Montpelier, a lot of it. And there are a lot of people who are just going to come in and vent, okay? Right. They just need, that's okay.
Right.
They just need someone to talk to. And in terms of their mental health, it's important to let them vent a little bit. If of course they've had a tough time. Maybe they're a little angry. If they need somebody to yell at, well, or they just need a shoulder to cry on. Well, that's why we're there. But we have to let them cry on our shoulder a little bit. But we also have to quickly turn, we got to lead.
Right.
We got to quickly turn the conversation to, okay, but
but
what does it look like going forward, and how do we help you going forward?
Speaking of the opioid crisis, we have a question. What about the Turning Point Center? Was that included in the numbers that you gave for places that may be? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you, I drove by the Turning Point Center, and they've set up some temporary, steps, because that building got creamed. And there was a large section, the walkway, and this is the stuff that really tugs at my heart a little bit. There was a large section of walkway that had been undermined, and they had dumped probably 3 yards of gravel right there. And there were two gentlemen there with shovels, hand shoveling. I mean, 3 yards of gravel is not a little bit of gravel. And there were two gentlemen there hand shoveling that gravel, because I drove by several times. And I'll tell you, I admire the hell out of stuff like that. They just decided we're going to get some gravel. Front walkway is washed out. Our members can't get here, and so we're going to fix it. And that's what they were doing. So yeah, absolutely. I drive by the Turning Point Center, but again, as we look forward, as we look to the future, obviously Bob has got a construction project planned. Bob's already figured out that he can't be there long term.
He can't be, yeah.
So absolutely, the Turning Point, I mean, those are important resources. Those problems haven't gone away.
Right.
And so, no, as I said earlier, Raylene, no one gets left behind. Some people it's going to take others, some people a little longer to catch up. It's going to take us a little longer to reach some people. But it's just important that we not quit until everyone... I don't think we can make it right for everyone. I mean, it sucks when everything floods. For me, when I look at 30 years worth of work just get destroyed in 6 hours, pretty damn discouraging, and I'm sure it's discouraging for a lot of homeowners. So we can't make it right. I mean, I think the trauma of what a lot of people are experiencing now, the after effects, that's real.
Right.
And we have to pay attention to that as well.
Mm-hmm. Trauma and rain. Rain.
I
and
know.
more rain.
I keep
It's
looking
raining
out
now.
and
Yeah, it's raining.
damn rain.
I know.
Yeah, but at least it's not the pouring rain.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this is the kind of rain. It's. I've got a love-hate relationship with
Right.
rain
most
right
of
now.
us want this kind of rain.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I've got a love-hate relationship with rain. Sometimes I look at the rain and I'm like, okay, it's going to clean the parking lots a little bit and make
Right.
things look a little
Right.
bit better. Then I look forward and say, okay, but if we get too hard of rain, it's going to wash too much silt down the storm drains and probably clog them, and we'll be starting over
We'll be
again.
Where
So
we are.
Yeah.
So, and then one more question. FEMA buyout. Does that mean that it has to forever be a green space?
Correct.
If it does.
Correct. And that's why the conversations that I've had with everyone in government has been about, this needs to be a supplemental budget act.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we're stuck with, for example, you're not going to buy out every home. It's a neighborhood, for God's sakes.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to buy every home in the North End and leave it all a green space.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that would just be silly. It's a gateway to the city. It's a proud neighborhood. And there may be some homeowners who say, well, I want to stay here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, great. Let's make it as, and there may be some homeowners who say, despite the fact that my home is squarely in the floodplain and is absolutely at risk, it's my home
It's
and I
my
don't
home.
want to sell.
Right.
You got to respect that.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know that if we give people appropriate options, I don't know that that's necessarily going to be the case. So the FEMA buyouts, yes, it has to stay green space. For some of the areas affected by landslides,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it should stay a green space
Mm-hmm.
because those folks are at risk. But for other areas where we can buy some areas, some homes and businesses, we can do some mitigation, leave that a green space so that actually indent it so the water has a place to go,
Mm-hmm.
and just don't make it a crappy,
Right.
uninteresting green
Right.
space. You could make it a park.
Yeah.
It's sort of a little bowl, and hey, we're the granite capital of the world. We could
Right.
put sculptures there. We could
Right.
have walking paths. And eventually, in the next 10 years, that park will likely fill up with water and silt, and we'll be replanting the grass and redoing the paths.
Right.
But we won't be relocating people. And then as we rebuild, we can be smarter. We can do multifamilies, we could do single families, but we could make sure that they're raised out of harm's way.
Mm-hmm.
So there's just a lot of options to have, but if you're going to rebuild on a space where a buyout has occurred at the FEMA level, you have to leave it green. That's why I was saying it needs to be a supplemental budget adjustment so that the money can come to the state, and the state can affect the buyouts, and the state can say, look, if you raise the building up and it's appropriately flood-proofed, not a problem. You can build here. The downstreet apartments on Keith Avenue, that is a fairly recent building. They were unaffected.
Yeah.
They
were lucky too, because just literally across the street diagonal where Washington County Mental Health is,
Yep.
the Imagination Station was completely underwater.
Right. But no, they weren't lucky.
Yeah.
They were smart.
Yeah.
They built
True.
to flood standards.
Right.
Barre
Yeah.
City Place.
Yep.
Totally unaffected. I mean, other than they have a beautiful garden out front. They have really nice landscaping, and they had to redo their landscaping.
Right.
And their flagpole, I think their flagpole ended up on Merchants Row.
Which is crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the building itself, there were people occupying that building and going to work the next day.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's about rebuilding smart. And this time, enough is enough. We need to talk seriously about what large-scale buyouts might look like, what really is best for the neighborhood. And that doesn't mean you jam it down somebody's throat. Even though, it's funny that I guess we do it all the time at the city level. We're constantly coming up with, planning and zoning laws, and we're telling people, well, this is what your building's going to look like. So
Right.
we do it all the time, but
Right.
I think when you're talking about neighborhoods and the character of a neighborhood, I think you got to be a little bit more careful, and some people may need a little more convincing than others. Some people might be a little more stubborn. I'm stubborn, and sometimes I look at things and say, damn it, I'm going to put this back the way it was.
Right.
And that's not always the smartest thing. Sometimes you want to get through the disaster and rebuild as quickly as possible. And what I found myself doing more and more as we rebuild buildings, I take a step back with the contractor and say, but how do we make it better?
Mm-hmm.
we had electrical panels. We had very few electrical panels affected because we had already raised them up. Most of our construction is, fairly new construction within the last 10 years. The Dollar General building at 540 North Main Street.
Yeah.
Nothing. The electrical and HVAC is absolutely fine. It's a big, tough brick building. The building didn't buckle.
Right. It was
literally,
just the
we
mud
had
and silt
it was the
yeah.
crap and the mud and the silt, and that is cleaned,
Yeah.
and the sheetrock is stripped, and literally, But as far as the utilities go, everything was unaffected. That building, we can turn on the heat today if we need to. We had the air conditioning on, blowing air around. So as like I said, we've just got to be smarter about when we rebuild. And I know, right now the state is mandating that in a lot of areas you must pick things up out of the basement. I have pushed back a little bit on that, and because in some cases my concern is that we don't have time.
Right.
If you have to repipe, take a house with steam heat. So a lot of homes are like this. They have steam heat.
Mm-hmm.
When you have steam heat, the boiler has to be in the basement. The reason being the steam has to condensate, turn to water, and we use gravity so that it flows actually back to the furnace. And then by the time it flows back, it's water because the steam is condensed. And then it's reheated, and then it becomes steam and goes back up into the system. A furnace like that has to be in the basement. Now, if you have baseboard hot water or you have a heat pump, doesn't have to be in the basement.
Mm-hmm.
You can pump the water through the system, and certainly with heat pumps, you can put them pretty much anywhere in the home. But when you do that, it's a much bigger project.
Mm-hmm.
If you have to strip out old cast iron radiators and you got to move that furnace upstairs, now you're not only replacing the boiler is not a hard job. Mm-hmm. Repiping an entire system doubles the length of time.
Mm-hmm.
So I know sometimes it's not always efficient, but we need to consider the possibility that maybe we should tell people, look, it's your choice. You can restore what is there. If you do that, we're going to give you 24 months to move it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's going to be, not the most efficient way to do things,
right?
But we have to recognize that we're only about 30 days away from pretty inclement weather.
Some people just need to do it quickly.
Sure.
For now.
And a lot of people have.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people have. You had to. How do you dry a basement with dehumidifiers if you don't have power?
Right.
So
I know.
So we just have to be, thoughtful and listen. One size is not going to fit all in this discussion. Mm-hmm. People are going to feel differently, and it's important that we listen, but it's equally important. It's critical, I think, that we engage.
Me too. September 1st, Vermont Creamery is shutting down for Better Maker Day. And so they're sending 80 to 90 people our way to volunteer for different things. And I've coordinated a few things with them and where certain groups will go. But there's going to be more groups looking for things to do. So if you have any great ideas, we'd love to know. And then anybody who is still looking for help, please reach out and let me know, and we'll send them your way. I think that's awesome.
There's still a fair amount of, when you go through the North End, a lot of folks have done the work on their own. Mm-hmm. So, for example, the city manager, and, Nicholas has done an incredible job. He has, I'll tell you, talk about baptism by fire. Holy cow, but he has done an incredible job. We didn't receive a lot of notice. Everybody is trying to move as quickly as possible. We received notice that, 2-day notice that the trash pickup, residential trash pickup, commercial's already over.
Right.
So if you're a commercial entity and you're throwing your trash on the sidewalk, cut it out.
Right.
That's your trash. But it has, but we only got 2 days notice that the residential was going to end. And Nicholas immediately, but he immediately pushed back and said, we think that will be a problem. We think there are folks who are a little further behind. Mm-hmm. We think there are folks who have, they're a little slower to get rid of their.
There is. Like I said,
so he got us another week so that we could tell people, chop, let's get going. Mm-hmm. And so I thought that was a great move on his part. But I think there are going to be, when you talk about this group, and thank you, first of all, thank you very much for coordinating the volunteers. I think we're absolutely going to have people who are further behind, and I think I think as you put the word out, you'll find that there are a lot of people who are still cleaning up. Like you look at the yards.
Yeah.
You know, the yards look pretty good, but they could use a really good raking. And if you had 80 people going house to house, you know.
Right.
And I realized that raking is very different than replacing a furnace. But sometimes, you know, in the middle of all this thing, you know, the Cornerstone parking lot was full of silt and crap. And in the middle of all of this, Karen had landscaping redone. Because she just looked at me and, you know, the buildings, we've got painting to do, we got repairs to do, but she said, I just wanted something to look pretty. And sometimes it makes you feel good.
Yeah.
Not always the best use of resources, but when I thought about it, I'm like, well, what are the landscapers doing anyway? They're not mowing lawns.
Right, they're not mowing lawns right now. Sweeping up dirt. Yeah. Well, thanks, as always, for coming in.
Well, thanks for having me. We had fun, and, you know, Raylene, we are all in this together. Some can do more, some can donate more, some can volunteer more. You know, it's not a contest.
No.
You know, in life, there's no such thing as equal, and I've always believed that. In a business partnership, there's always a partner who brings more to the table. In a marriage, you know, marriage isn't equal. In a relationship, most relationships aren't perfectly equal. There is no such thing. But it takes everybody doing their part or nothing works. So to all the people who have volunteered, whether you volunteered 15 minutes or 15 days, thank you. To all of the donors.
And it all looks different. And that's
absolutely.
what I said. Somebody may literally just be a phone call to say, are you okay today? If they may be giving a ride. They may be helping fill out paperwork or explain something. Volunteering and helping means all kinds of different things. And every single bit of it counts.
And it's critical that we keep, you know, in order for us to keep moving forward, we need those 15 minutes. We need, whether it's 15 minutes or 15 days, we need every single bit of it. Whether it's $5 or $50,000, we need every single bit of it. So thank you. Everybody who's doing their part and doing what they can, we love you. We appreciate you.
All right. Thank you all very much. Stay tuned. Keep track of the page. We're going to be doing some pretty cool giveaways. We've teamed up with Rooted Entertainment. They have a big show going on this weekend in Thompson. It's the Green Mountain Smokeout. Kind of like the old time, you know, Grateful Dead kind of smokeout.
Oh, it's like a Grateful Dead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, tune in. We're going to do some money off and some giveaways for that event that's happening this weekend. And then don't forget that tickets are on sale right now for Vermont Rises concert that is happening on the 20th this Sunday at Higher Ground, and that is 8084 Chris Hollister, Chad Hollister, Jamie Lee Thurston, and Rusty DeWeese. So please sign on, get your tickets. It's going to be a good time. Thanks, and